Hello and welcome back. In today's video, let's talk about variable dice. These are very rare endgame items that are only obtainable once every few months, but when used correctly, they make it much easier to get great relics for your favorite characters. I've analyzed more than $20,000 worth of variable dice rolls from bilibili videos, and I'll tell you up front, they do seem to roll fairly without any significant biases. In the rest of the video, I'll tell you the full story on that and then share some thoughts and tips on how to actually best make use of them, while hopefully minimizing the amount of fancy math and statistics required. Now, to make sure that newer players can also get benefit from the video, I wanted to quickly run through some of the basics. So we might as well start with, what do variable dice even do? They let you reroll the actual hits and values on relics without changing the types of stats. If we wanted to reroll gloves like this, with flat attack main stat and flat defense, percent HP, speed, and crit damage substats, after rerolling, the relic will always keep those exact same types, so flat attack main stat and flat defense, percent HP, speed, and crit damage substats. However, the individual hits themselves, or how many times each substat got boosted, can change, and that's the purpose of variable dice. They give us the opportunity to potentially fix relics that have the right stats but whose rolls aren't ideal. The game also comes with a protection mechanism where you can choose to either accept the new rolls or keep using your previous ones. In either case though, the dice itself is consumed. Which brings us into the next detail of 4-line versus 5-line relics. Whenever relics are created, they have a roughly 80% chance of being 4 lines with 3 substats, and a roughly 20% chance of being 5 lines with 4 substats. Personally, I find it easier calling them 4-liners and 5-liners because that matches cleanly with the number of hits they have at plus 15. What I mean by that is, when these relics are enhanced, the 4-line one gets its final substat revealed at plus 3, while the 5-line one starts hitting the existing stats immediately, which means by the time both relics reach plus 15, the 5-line one would have gotten 5 hits, or 1 more than the 4-liner, with 4 hits. In general, this is always true, so you can identify if a relic started as a 5-liner or a 4-liner by counting the number of hits that are on the relic at plus 15. Unlike other games, where the individual lines might be slightly lower if there are more of them, the 5-liner does not come with any penalties and is purely a free bonus in Star Rail. That's not to say all 5-liners are better than all 4-liners, but the very best relics will always be 5-liner relics. And generally speaking, you would want to prioritize using the variable dice on relics that have more potential, which will usually end up being 5-liner relics rather than 4-liners. The last thing I'll mention is that whenever we talk about relics, the initial value itself, as well as each extra hit, is actually one of 3 random values, often called the low, medium, and high rolls. Rerolling the relic with variable dice will change these as well, but for this video, we'll pretend these don't exist because it's really a final 1% optimization. To put things into perspective, if you're currently not worrying about stats like flat HP or flat attack, you have no business worrying about this because even those matter more. Now, the actual story started when I saw a post on Reddit about how a Chinese whale pulled 88 copies of Castorice to get godly rolls on her relics. Now, usually, variable dice are given from very time-gated events, like the Battle Pass, but one extreme and slightly hidden exception is that when you pull for a duplicate of a character that you already have E6 for, you get a silver companion spirit, which can be converted into a gold companion spirit and then variable dice. The overall exchange rate here is 1 5-star character per dice, so it's paying a bit more than $100 per dice. Now, most of the comments on Reddit were making fun of the guy, but I thought it would be fun to tally up the stats and see how they were actually rolling, because usually the dice would come in too few quantities to actually get a proper sample for. And I ended up going down a rabbit hole where it seemed there were a few others on bilibili also doing the same thing, aka Chinese YouTube. Overall, I found 9 videos containing 252 dice rolls, of which 223 of them were done with 5-liner relics. If we focus on the 223 5-liner rolls and group them together to not spread things out too thinly, this is what we get. So if a 5-liner relic got 3 hits on one stat and 2 hits on another stat, regardless which specific lines or stats they were, we considered it as part of the 3-2 group. Basically, each group represents how the hits were stacked up without worrying about which specific lines they happened on. Keep in mind these numbers are not a direct success percentage because you need to include an extra layer of these hits then going on to the specific stats you want. But the purpose here is just to see if the numbers are distributed fairly like we're expecting. And when compared against the expected results where each hit is done with fair randomness, the numbers do end up very similar to each other. To visualize things better, we can also compare our actual numbers against multiple simulations. If each simulation also rolls the same 223 times, we can get a sense of how much natural variation can be expected. The actual numbers that we got are pretty close to the overall cluster of results, which is to say there doesn't seem to be any weirdness going on and our numbers do seem reasonable. The only outlier is in the pure 5 hits case, where we were a lot luckier than average, but we're only working with 3 rolls here and any small variations would end up skewing things by a lot. There are many other ways to analyze the data as well, and I'll leave some extra details and thoughts either in the video description or as a pinned comment. But for now, I think we can jump into the second major part of the video on how we can make the most out of variable dice for our own purposes. Let's say we're building for Hyacine, who wants speed, HP, and crit damage. We have a good 5-line relic with all 3 stats, but one of the hits is unfortunately not as useful. One way we can think about the situation is how many useful hits are on the relic, which is the same idea as what the game calls effective substats, but in this case effective hits. So we can say our relic currently has 4 effective hits, and we want to understand our success rate for getting 5 effective hits if we used variable dice on it. These are the results we get after running some simulations, where the chances of us getting 5 effective hits is a bit less than 25%, or a bit more than 4 rerolls on average. We can also present the plot in terms of cumulative values, which might be more intuitive. If someone says, I would be happy if I can get 4 hits, this is actually a minimum. They're not looking for exactly 4 hits and would be perfectly happy getting 5 hits as well. With this view, we can see that if our goal is just getting at least 4 hits, the chances are very good, but they do become noticeably harder if we insist on getting all 5 hits. Let's say we're also considering another relic, still for Hyacine, but this time it's an orb. Because HP is already taken up by the main stat, we only have 2 useful lines, speed and crit damage, on a 5-line relic. It turns out, us being pickier like this makes it significantly harder to roll. The chances of us getting all 5 hits onto good substats drops from 23% to just 3%. And I will say the reason why the Chinese whales needed so many rolls in their videos was because they were doing this exact same thing. Sometimes it is just difficult if your character is only looking for 3 stats and one of them is already locked up by a main stat. But I would really suggest to not get yourself into this situation unnecessarily. You may be better off focusing on other pieces or waiting for a useful 3 substat relic with, for example, speed before rerolling. At this point, we can also consider what happens when we include the interference key or the stat blocker. Currently, we can only get 1 per patch, and when used in a reroll, they allow you to completely block out 1 substat from getting hit. If we overlay the new rates onto the existing ones, the biggest winner is definitely the 3 substat case, where the stat blocker now gives you 100% success, because when you have 4 possible substats and you block out the one you don't want, all the remaining hits can only go on the ones you do want. However, for the 2 substat relics, these percentages are a bit misleading. You might compare the boosted rate, averaging 7.6 rerolls on the upper end, to the initial rate, averaging 32 rerolls, and think that while both are rare, this saves you 24.4 rerolls on average. But this is not saying one stat blocker saves you around 24 rerolls. It's saying if you used stat blockers for every single roll, it would save you that many rerolls in total. But the obvious problem is we only get 1 stat blocker. So we can reframe this in a more useful way, where the boosted line is now the overall success rate, assuming we used 1 stat blocker for the first attempt and regular rerolls for everything else. We see now that one stat blocker by itself doesn't do anything special for the 2 substat scenarios, and doesn't save you more rerolls than the 3 substat scenarios either. At this point, we've covered the 2 most important scenarios, so let's talk about the bigger picture. In general, the difficulty in rerolling relics depends on 2 things. The most important is how picky we're being, saying we only want these 1, 2, or 3 particular substats. And the other is the number of hits involved, which is actually just whether we're rerolling a 5-line or 4-line relic. Here are all the cases, and at this point I promised the main point wouldn't be math heavy, so let's end off the video considering what actually matters. Rerolls are significantly easier the less picky you are. 3 acceptable substats is a great starting point. 2 acceptable substats are kind of rough, and please don't roll for just 1 substat. And furthermore, if you have a relic where all 4 substats are good already, you don't even need rerolling. For example, something like speed, HP, crit rate, crit damage. That's really the best, right? You should always try rerolling 5-line relics over 4-line ones, both because they have higher potential and because they're easier to roll, because they allow you to miss a hit and still be equal to a 4-liner. Adding on to that, you can think of interference keys as being worth roughly 3 extra rerolls, and of course, they're best used on 5-liner relics with 3 substats. In the bigger picture, still remember that 1 or 2 substats here and there is not going to make a big difference in your damage. This kind of rerolling is really when you reach quote-unquote endgame where you have nothing better to do, or you really like certain characters. Thank you for watching, and I hope that was helpful.